Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Joel, you've built a lot of wealth with your rental properties. Can you tell us what's the difference between building wealth and being rich?
Well, I kind of make the parallel between being rich and being wealthy with a parallel to knowledge versus wisdom. Knowledge is simply the accumulation and maybe the understanding of facts, but wisdom is the ability to put that knowledge to good use, to proper use. And with being rich versus being wealthy, rich is simply the accumulation of cash. But wealth is the proper application of that cash to make a better world.
There's two big things that Joel did to build his wealth with his rental properties. The first one is Joel was always really smart with his money. He always lived below his means and took any extra money he had and used that to invest in rental properties. And at the same time, he was really smart with his use of leverage and using other people's money to build out his rental portfolio. The second thing that Joel is really big on is building relationships. Relationships is what led him to buy every property he has in his portfolio. And on the show, we're going to talk about how he built those relationships, how he thinks about money, and how he got to where he is today. Joining us on the show today from Erie, Pennsylvania is Joel Miller. We'll take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Joel. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056.
Rental Income Podcast.
Joel, let's start off talking about your portfolio. Can you tell me what your portfolio looks like?
Well, I've primarily been investing in residential rentals. Bought my first one in 1978 and kind of grew that portfolio over the years to include some single-family homes, some, 2 units, either flats or duplexes of some sort. I got one 3-unit place, and we have a few 4-unit townhouse style properties that are, all of these properties are primarily in what we would call B or C neighborhoods.
Did you build your portfolio back in the 70s and 80s, or have you sold properties over the years and added new properties?
Yeah, for many years, I never sold anything that I had acquired. I was, during the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, I was really accumulating. I didn't sell off anything until probably the past 10 years. We've sold, and I say we, I refer to my wife and I. We've sold some off and acquired some newer, nicer ones, to replace ones as we, I guess you could say upgrading the portfolio.
Okay, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So maybe when you were getting started, you bought what you could afford, but then as you accumulated more money and were able to trade up to nicer properties, that's what you did.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, sometimes you just have to start with things that require maybe a little more management, hands-on management, but they are cash flowing very nicely. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the trade-off. Sometimes you can have a lot of cash flow from older properties in C neighborhoods and so on that also by their nature would require a little more attention than the shiny new ones that don't have as much maintenance. Sure. And you are in better neighborhoods and better tenants and so on.
So, I mean, you've obviously made some great investments, and I think you've been really smart with your money. You've done everything right here, but the world today is maybe a little bit different. Prices are higher, interest rates are higher. Do you think it's possible for someone that's just getting started today to do what you've done?
Oh, absolutely, because I started in worse conditions. In January of 1978, we were just coming out of experiencing high inflation through the 60s in the Nixon era, and we were in the Jimmy Carter presidency. And I'm not blaming these guys; I'm just using this as a time reference for what was going on. In the time not long after I bought my first rental, the prime was over 20%. The prime interest rate, during Jimmy Carter was that. And I forget what the interest rate was on my first property, but I'm pretty sure it was about 10%.
Wow,
which is way higher than it is right now.
Right.
I was a tenant for the first 5 years that I was also a landlord, because I was living in an apartment complex where I had originally been hired as a resident manager there, but I stayed there for a number of years after I was not in that position. So by the time I first bought my first home in 1983 that I was going to live in, I was happy to get an interest rate of 12.5%.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
I mean, really, it puts things in perspective where the rates seem high today, but historically they're really not. They just feel high because of where we were 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
Well, yes, and even longer. I mean, many of the people that are probably in your audience and that are certainly around, my world here of other investors that I am, rubbing elbows with, they got into this business during the past, 10 years or so when the interest rates were, I would say, artificially low. What we've experienced, since about 2008, shall we say, is artificially low. Those interest rates at prime at 3.25%, that's not normal.
Right.
Any more than 20% is normal with prime. I was reading something just yesterday in a little magazine called Bottom Line Personal. It was an article written by Richard Silla, and he was talking about this very thing. And he said that interest rates generally rose from 1945 to 81 and then generally fell from 81 to 21. But as of January 2024, the federal funds rate was 5.25% to 5.5%, which is roughly in line with the 5.42% it has averaged since 1971.
Wow.
So, we are not in a tough time for people to begin or to continue investing in rental real estate.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think the bigger challenge we have right now is inventory, that there's just not a lot of houses for sale.
Right. Which is why people are continuing to support the high prices of the houses. And I'm talking also about single family homes, not just like ones people are going to live in, and not just rental property. Because even though the interest rate's up, there's not an inventory. So if they still want to make the move to buying this type of property, they're not only going to have to pay the high interest rate, they're also going to have to pay the higher price for the house. Theoretically, when you have a higher interest rate, the prices on the houses go down a little bit, because there's only so much of a payment people would afford for the same house, with more going to interest and less going to the purchase of the house when interest rates are higher. But it's kind of not what we're experiencing right now. And I suppose the only way it's going to be able to level out is to just somehow increase the housing stock.
Right. And I think also it's important to not let that be an excuse. I mean, there's always deals out there. There's always distressed sellers. There's always people that need to sell quickly. So do you think it's important?
Exactly. To get back to your original question, is it a bad time to invest? No, it's never a bad time to invest, because at any given time, there's a way to, there are deals that may not look the same as they would have to look in another scenario, but there are deals that make it possible to have a positive cash flow and an increase, an appreciation over time for future value. You just got to jump in.
Very well said. Yeah. So Joel, you've been on the podcast a couple of times, and you and I we've talked a bunch of times off the podcast, and from kind of thinking about your success, that there's two things that I think you've been really good at, and I want to see if you think I'm right. Maybe I'm missing something, but I think you're really good at money and the way you think about money, and you're really good at building relationships. So do you think that's the two keys to your success?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. I'm a part of several masterminds, and, I also get into private conversations with other investors, and they might have a question about, something that they want to do, or should I do this or not, that kind of thing. And I'm known for giving a lot of people the same answer, or spouting this off maybe at a mastermind if the conversation goes a certain way. And that's this. I tell them that if I had a choice between losing all my money or losing all my relationships, I would choose lose all my money in a heartbeat, because if I still have the relationships, they will help me get my money back. Yep. And if I lost all my relationships, who would I enjoy the money with?
Right.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, my bottom line is, it's better to keep a relationship intact than to obsess over some perceived, slight that you might have, or try to squeeze every dime out of a situation when the other party may feel taken advantage of as a result of that. So here's the key point. Don't make a withdrawal from a good relationship just to make a deposit in your bank account.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's spot on. So let's talk about that. I want to talk about the money part and the relationship part. But so for the money part, like when you were building your rental portfolio, did you feel like you were making a big sacrifice at that time? Because you've got money you're going to put down on a property. I mean, you easily could buy some toy or do something else with that money. Did it feel like a sacrifice?
No, and I'll tell you why. It's because early on I learned the importance of and how to live beneath my means. In other words, spend less than I was taking in, so that I was always saving. I didn't always know what I was saving for, but it would be for the next investment kind of thing.
I think it's hard because everyone has a finite amount of money, and it's like there's so many demands for that money. And actually, I got a voicemail this week that ties in so perfectly for what we're talking about. Let me play this for you real quick and get your thoughts, and maybe we can help this listener out.
Hi, Dan. I just bought my first investment property and I'm super excited. However, I am now ready to start saving for my second property, but I would like to still travel and live my best life. So I'm torn on what to do.
That's a tough thing to balance. I mean, she wants to buy more rental properties, but she also wants to go on vacations and spend money on that. So how would you balance, or what advice would you give her?
I am a firm believer in that the only way this is going to work, investing in rental property, in addition to maybe something else you're doing, is that you do see some rewards for it. You got to make it real for yourself along the way. So I'm not opposed to, carving out some of your profits from your existing properties and so on to improve your life and have it feel like it's worthwhile for all the effort and expertise that you put into building your portfolio. But on the other hand, you don't want to spend all your profits, or you'll never get any more properties. So it has to be a balance of what you how much you increase your standard of living as you go through increasing your net cash flow from your rental properties, and not spending so much that you can't invest in any more rental properties.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something that people run into if they maybe have a car that's on its last legs, and they maybe have some cash, let's say maybe they have $30,000. Do they use that money to buy a new car, or do they put that into a rental property? I mean, what would you say to do?
I think what I would do is use the $30,000 to make another investment in something that produces income, and let's presume that's going to be rental real estate, so that it produces the income necessary to pay the payment on the car.
Right.
You see? So now the advice is a little different for a vacation. Like, let's say you were trying to, should I do a $30,000 vacation or buy another rental property? Well, here's the thing. You have your vacation, and unlike the car, which still has some value and utility over many years, and ultimately you can get money from selling it, the vacation, other than your memories, is not something that is going to produce any income unless somehow you write a book based on your experiences on your vacation and you make out on that. But so those are kind of different things. But if I was only making $1,000 extra now on my rental properties a month, and I'm trying to decide between going on a $20,000 vacation or investing in some more rental property, I think my advice would be to invest in more rental property and build up your cash flow, and then take vacations along the way that don't put such a dent into what you have
I guess
left.
You've really got to make buying rentals a priority. Like that is the most important thing you can do. Now, what about, like, say when you have a few properties and maybe those properties have some equity in them, whether the market's appreciated or maybe you've done something to improve the property. Are you a fan of tapping into that equity to continue to grow your portfolio, or do you feel more comfortable having low leverage on your properties?
Oh, I will be the first one to tell you that you will not get as far as you could in rental real estate if you don't use leverage. Now, you may have at your goal, many years down the road, that you want your properties paid off and you can enjoy all the cash flow without having to carve out money for a mortgage payment. I get that. But if you're in the stages of growing, it won't grow without using OPM, which stands for other people's money, which means leverage. If you've got equity in a property, and I did this a number of times, maybe I bought a property that was a fixer-upper, and I would get another mortgage on it, a permanent mortgage on it, and it would pay myself back not only for all the money that I put into it initially, but I would have extra money left over, and you just keep going from there in using that money to get into other properties, sometimes paying cash for the property because it was so cheap and you had the money and you were going to work on it for 6 months and then get all your money back with a new mortgage or something like that. But you have to use leverage, because if you count on saving up the money to buy a rental property outright and not have a mortgage on it, you're going to go really, really slow.
Yeah. You're going to end up with one property, maybe. I mean, you're never going to grow a portfolio doing it that way.
Right. Now, and in addition to that, I think this is part of your question. If I have equity in a property, I might use that equity for improvements on that same property too, with another mortgage, a second mortgage, or a refinance altogether.
Now, with the cash flow, so as you've got a few properties and you've got some cash flow coming in, there's lots of competing forces. If you're going to keep that money in your portfolio, there's lots of competing forces where you're trying to keep some cash on hand to pay for repairs. You're thinking about maybe down the road, you're going to have some CapEx stuff, maybe a new roof or a new HVAC. And then also you've got to save money to continue to invest. So how do you think about all that? Or like, how do you set things up so that you've got money for everything you're going to need to do?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that there are different types of savings that need to all be going on simultaneously. And this takes some examination of your habits and your finances, and some definition of your goals in order to be saving money, maybe in even physically different accounts on a regular basis to accomplish different things. When we're talking about just saving for the routine monthly things, the routine annual things, and a little bit for the bumps in the road, you're not really getting anywhere. You're just treading water. All you're doing is making sure that you don't have a calamity in your life with the normal things that come up. You're treading water because it's like a lot of action, but you're not getting anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
See what I mean?
Yep.
It's not until you put money aside that you don't even know what you're going to do with it yet, until the opportunity comes along for long-term savings, that you are really setting yourself up for being able to expand your portfolio and purchase things that are going to produce even more money for you. Because you don't want to be in a position where you have an opportunity that comes up to buy a piece of rental property from all your efforts, of learning about how to do it and marketing or trying to find a property that you want, and then have to take money out of those routine sort of savings accounts that we talked about first.
Right. I mean, you've
because then you wreck something else in your life.
Right. I mean, so it's like it's almost like you're playing offense and defense at the same time. That you want to keep growing, but you've got to make sure that you're going to be safe if some expense comes up.
So you have to make important decisions about your standard of living, like what is your standard that still allows you to put money aside? In other words, are you able to live beneath your means? Yeah, you could have this asset here, this or this vacation or whatever. You could, but you don't. You choose not to. But in reference to my answer about the vacation, I'm not all about making your life miserable, just to be able to expand rapidly with income producing property. You have to keep it real along the way. Otherwise, it's like being on a diet, that you just hate. Eventually, you're going to say, I just can't do this.
Right.
And you give up.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you got to keep the long term that, where you are today, I'm assuming you don't need to make as many sacrifices today as you did back in the early days because you made those decisions.
Exactly.
Right.
And I didn't develop bad habits back in the beginning of spending all that was coming in, so that as I've made more money, I'm not, feeling the urge to well, I've got more, I'll just spend more,
Mm-hmm. Right.
It eventually becomes easy because you, if you're disciplined, you realize at some point that if you just keep at this, you're going to be making more money than, I'm going to use this term, than you know what to do with, because you haven't trained yourself to spend all the money that comes in. You've trained yourself that you're living in a certain level, and then as time goes by, it just keeps kind of steamrolling that the extra amount is more and more, and then that gets invested and becomes even more and more. It's just a snowball effect throughout life, totally, if you're disciplined.
Let's talk about your relationships. I think this is something else that you've been really good at. And one thing you said to me once, and I wrote this down: acquiring wealth is not a win-lose game. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
So it doesn't have to be that in order for you to become rich, or in order for you to win, that somebody else has to lose. Everybody can win along the way.
Yep.
When you're helping each other, and especially you'll find this in a community of investors. Like if you belong to a local group of investors that meet, you got properties that get passed around among them. Right. One guy made money on a property, and time comes, he sells it to somebody else who does the same thing. Carries it on from there, and other things are happening. Like maybe one investor is wanting to buy properties, and another investor in the group is able to lend money in order for that to happen, or lend expertise. There's enough deals out there for everybody.
Right.
If you just look around enough, and it doesn't mean that you have to be knocking somebody else off in order for you to get ahead.
Now, one thing I've noticed from participating in groups like that is that the real power comes from being a regular at the meeting. Like just going once and meeting some people is great. Maybe you'll make a relationship or learn something. But I feel like when you become a part of that community, that's where the real magic happens. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you that, over time, and I've been a member of the apartment association since a couple years after it started, whenever not long after I bought my first property. So there's a lot of years that have gone by there. And I can tell you that at any given time over all these decades, there's always a synergy going on, among the members. And it's an ever-changing group of members. People have come out in and out of the business over those years. But it always seems that, when we get together, there's a synergy and everybody benefits.
Yeah. Have you found a lot of deals through relationships?
Yeah. In fact, I can tell you that this might blow your mind. In addition to the rental properties, I have flipped a lot of properties over the years. But I will tell you that I have never bought a rental property that was listed through a realtor.
Wow.
Every single property I bought was an off-market deal, and most of the flips were off-market deals as well. Some of them were purchased with my realtor bringing me recommendations to buy. And then anytime that I've sold a flip, I've always used a realtor to sell it, with a few exceptions. But that's because I'm marketing it to somebody that's not an investor, that's going to move into that, if we're talking about a flip property. However, I've also never sold a rental property through a realtor.
Wow. Yeah.
All my properties that I've sold have been to other investors.
That really shows the power of relationships. If you're not a part of a local RIA group or a local meetup group, get out there and join one. I think it'll only benefit you. If anybody wants to reach out to Joel, I've got his contact information on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 458. I'd like to thank Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group for sponsoring today's episode. Chaley is a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She can find something customized to you in your situation. If you want to find out more, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out today's podcast. I'll be back with a new episode next Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.